7 people died from a headache, not from the pain, but from what they swallowed to stop it. Tonight, you'll learn how a killer weaponized America's most trusted medicine cabinet, walked into stores, and vanished. 40 years later, the FBI still can't name him. But at minute 14, you'll meet the man they came closest to catching. It's the morning of September 29, 1982. In the quiet suburb of Elk Grove Village, Illinois, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman wakes up with a sore throat and a runny nose. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening. Her parents, Dennis and Gianna, do what millions of American parents do that morning. They walk to the medicine cabinet, twist open a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol, and hand their daughter a single red and white capsule with a glass of water. By 7 a.m., Mary is on the bathroom floor. By 9:56 a.m., she is pronounced dead at Alexian Brothers Medical Center. The pediatrician who examined her body would later say he had never seen anything like it. A perfectly healthy child, gone in under 3 hours. Her father would spend the next 40 years asking a question no one has ever answered. Why her? Why any of them? What Mary's family didn't know, what nobody in Chicago knew yet, was that Mary was not the first. She was only the first to be discovered. And she would not be the last. Before the sun set on the following day, 6 more people would be dead, and a killer, whose name we still do not know, would disappear into the streets of Chicago, carrying with him one of the most terrifying secrets in American criminal history. This is the story of the Tylenol murders, a crime so brazen, so anonymous, and so quietly evil that it rewrote the rules of how every product you buy is sealed, packaged, and protected. It launched one of the largest manhunts the FBI has ever conducted. It cost Johnson & Johnson over $100 million. And more than 4 decades later, despite thousands of interviews, DNA testing, grand juries, and one very persistent suspect, no one has ever been charged with the murders themselves. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Tylenol was in 1982. It wasn't just a painkiller, it was America's painkiller. Johnson & Johnson had spent years building it into the most trusted over-the-counter medication in the country. Doctors recommended it, hospitals stocked it, it commanded 37% of the entire analgesic market. When your head hurt, when your child had a fever, when your back seized up after a long shift, you reached for the red and white bottle. It was as ordinary and as invisible as tap water. And that is exactly what the killer counted on. On the morning Mary Kellerman died, a 27-year-old postal worker named Adam Janis was also feeling under the weather. He lived in Arlington Heights, just a few miles from the Kellermans. Around noon, he took 2 extra-strength Tylenol capsules for chest discomfort. Within an hour, he collapsed in front of his young children. Paramedics rushed him to Northwest Community Hospital. He was declared dead by early afternoon. Doctors assumed a massive heart attack. He was young, but not impossibly young for a cardiac event. The family was devastated. Relatives gathered at Adam's house that evening to grieve. Among them were his younger brother, 25-year-old Stanley Janis, and Stanley's wife, 19-year-old Teresa. Both were suffering from tension headaches, the kind grief brings on. They walked into Adam's kitchen. They opened the same bottle of Tylenol Adam had used that morning. They each swallowed capsules. Stanley collapsed first. Teresa collapsed moments later. Paramedics arrived at the Janis home for the second time in a single day. 2 more members of the same family, dead within hours of each other, from what appeared to be identical symptoms. It was at this moment, standing in that kitchen, that a firefighter and a nurse working the case began to realize something no one had wanted to say out loud. This was not a coincidence. This was not a heart condition. Something in that house had killed 3 people. The suspicion first fell on a gas leak, then carbon monoxide, then bad food. But an off-duty firefighter named Philip Capitelli was on the phone with his mother-in-law, who mentioned the strange death of a little girl in Elk Grove Village that same morning. A girl who had also taken Tylenol. Capitelli called it in. Another investigator, Nick Pichus, made the same connection independently. Within hours, someone finally said the words out loud. Check the Tylenol. A toxicologist tested the capsules. What they found should not have been possible. Inside the ordinary red and white capsules of extra-strength Tylenol was potassium cyanide, not a trace, not a residue. a dose so massive that each individual capsule contained enough cyanide to kill several adult humans. The lethal dose is around 200 milligrams. Some of these capsules contained 65 times that amount. By dawn on September 30th, 4 people were dead, but the horror was just beginning. That same day, Mary Reiner, a 27-year-old mother who had just given birth 1 week earlier, collapsed in her home in Winfield. Tylenol. Paula Prince, a 35-year-old United Airlines flight attendant, was found dead in her Chicago apartment. Tylenol. And Mary McFarland, a 31-year-old telephone company employee, collapsed at work in Elmhurst. Tylenol. 7 victims, 7 bottles, all within a 50-mile radius. All extra-strength Tylenol capsules, all laced with a lethal amount of potassium cyanide. The panic that followed is difficult to describe if you did not live through it. Chicago police drove through neighborhoods with loudspeakers, warning residents not to take Tylenol. Priests announced it from pulpits. Television broke into regular programming. Johnson & Johnson made a decision that business schools still study today. They recalled 31 million bottles of Tylenol from every store, every pharmacy, every hospital in the United States. Retail value, $100 million in 1982 money. The company's stock plummeted. Analysts predicted the brand was finished. Some said no product in history had ever survived what Tylenol was about to face. But the more urgent question was not about the brand, it was about the killer. Because investigators quickly determined something chilling. The cyanide had not been added at the factory. The bottles came from at least 2 different Johnson & Johnson plants, one in Pennsylvania and one in Texas. Whoever had done this had not poisoned the source. He had poisoned the store shelves. He had walked into pharmacies and supermarkets in the Chicago area, purchased bottles of Tylenol, taken them home, opened them, emptied out the acetaminophen from individual capsules, refilled them with cyanide, resealed the bottles, and then returned to the stores and placed the bottles back on the shelves. Think about what that means. He watched people take those bottles off the shelves. He may have watched them pay at the register. He knew, with mathematical certainty, that within days, strangers he had never met would die. And he wanted that. He arranged for it. He walked into the store, and he walked out, and he left death behind him on aisle 7. Investigators identified the stores: a Jewel Foods in Arlington Heights, an Osco Drug in Schaumburg, a Walgreens on North Wells Street in downtown Chicago. Store security footage from the era was primitive, but one grainy image emerged that has haunted investigators for 4 decades. Paula Prince, the flight attendant, is captured on camera at the Walgreens on North Wells, buying the bottle that would kill her. And behind her, standing at the end of the aisle, is a bearded man watching her. Watching. Investigators have studied that image for 40 years. They still do not know who he is. The FBI opened a case designated Teamers. Over 100 agents were assigned. More than 400 suspects were interviewed. Tens of thousands of leads were logged. And within weeks, a primary suspect emerged. His name was James William Lewis. Lewis was a strange man with a strange past. Born in Memphis, adopted, drifting through jobs, he had once been charged with the dismemberment murder of an elderly client named Raymond West in Kansas City. The charges were dropped on a technicality involving improperly obtained evidence, but the investigators who worked that case were certain of what he had done. In 1982, Lewis was living in Chicago with his wife Leanne. Then the murders happened, and then Johnson & Johnson received a letter. The letter demanded $1 million to, quote, stop the killing. It provided an account number where the money should be wired. That account belonged to a former employer of Leanne Lewis, a travel agency where she had been fired. Investigators traced the letter back to James Lewis. He and his wife had fled Chicago, first to New York, then across the country. He was arrested in a public library in Manhattan in December 1982. Here is the problem. Lewis admitted to writing the extortion letter. He was convicted for it and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. But he insisted, and he insisted for the rest of his life, that he did not commit the murders. He said he wrote the letter as an act of revenge against his wife's former employer, hoping the money would be traced to them and they would be blamed. It was cruel, opportunistic, ghoulish behavior. But was it murder? Investigators were split. They could place Lewis in New York during parts of September 1982. His wife had lived and worked in Chicago near the affected stores. He had motive, in the abstract sense of being a man capable of exploiting mass death for $1 million. He even, in later interviews, sketched detailed diagrams of exactly how he believed the killer had tampered with the capsules, describing the process in a way that some investigators found suspiciously precise. But there was no direct forensic evidence tying him to the poisoned bottles. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses placing him inside those specific stores at the relevant times. Lewis served 12 years, was released in 1995, and moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. In 2007, investigators executed a new search warrant at his apartment as part of a cold case review. They took computers, notebooks, samples for DNA testing. He gave interviews to reporters. He wrote a novel about a poisoner. He maintained, with a peculiar half-smile that unnerved everyone who interviewed him, that he was innocent. He died in July 2023 at the age of 76, having never been charged with the Tylenol murders. But Lewis was not the only suspect. In 2010, the FBI briefly focused on another name, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Kaczynski had lived in the Chicago suburbs. His parents owned a house not far from some of the affected stores. Investigators requested a DNA sample. Kaczynski, from his cell in the federal supermax, refused to cooperate unless his mailed manuscripts were preserved. The DNA was eventually obtained. The connection was never publicly confirmed either way. There have been other theories. A disgruntled Johnson & Johnson employee, though the multiple plant origins argued against this. A random psychopath, testing whether he could commit a perfect crime. A copycat inspired by an earlier, less famous product tampering case. Some criminologists have argued that the killer was not motivated by hatred of any specific victim. He was motivated by the act itself, the godlike power of choosing, from behind a curtain of anonymity, who lives and who dies. What we do know is what this case changed. Within months, Congress passed the Federal Anti-Tampering Act, making product tampering a federal crime punishable by life in prison. The FDA mandated tamper-evident packaging on all over-the-counter medications. Those little foil seals under the cap, the plastic shrink wrap around the neck of the bottle, the tight cardboard box that must be broken to open. Every single one of those exists because of 7 people who died in the Chicago suburbs in the fall of 1982. You have touched their legacy every time you have opened a bottle of aspirin. Johnson & Johnson, in an act many analysts now consider the greatest crisis management response in corporate history, replaced capsules entirely with solid caplets. They offered free replacements. They ran nationwide press conferences. Their CEO, James Burke, appeared personally on 60 Minutes to face every hard question. Within a year, Tylenol had recovered most of its market share. The brand was saved. The killer was not caught, and the victims. Let us not forget them behind the corporate history and the forensic details. Mary Kellerman, 12 years old, taking a capsule for a common cold. Adam Janis, 27, a father of 2. Stanley Janis, 25, and Teresa Janis, 19, newlyweds mourning Adam. Mary McFarland, 31, a mother of 2. Paula Prince, 35, who had just moved into a new apartment in Old Town. Mary Reiner, 27, holding her infant daughter 1 week before she died. 7 ordinary lives, 7 ordinary headaches, 7 ordinary trips to the medicine cabinet, and a killer who, if he is still alive, is now an old man somewhere. Perhaps he lives in a small house. Perhaps he watches documentaries about his own crimes. Perhaps he keeps a scrapbook. Or perhaps he died decades ago and took the secret to his grave, laughing at how completely he escaped. The Illinois Attorney General's office and the FBI still officially consider the case open. In 2011, they announced they had obtained new DNA evidence from the original capsules. Testing continues to this day, running new samples against expanding databases. Every few years, a new lid surfaces. Every few years, it goes cold again. The bearded man behind Paula Prince at the Walgreens still stares out from a grainy photograph, waiting to be named. And somewhere in a Chicago suburb, in a quiet neighborhood, on a September morning that feels a lot like the one in 1982, a mother is opening her medicine cabinet. She is reaching for a bottle. She is trusting the seal. She trusts it because 7 people died so that she could. And whoever killed them, whoever emptied those capsules and refilled them with poison and placed them back on the shelves and walked out into the parking lot smiling, is still out there. Or was. And nobody in 40 years has ever answered the only question that matters. Why? If this case disturbed you as much as it disturbs us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week on Dark Cases, we investigate the crimes history tried to bury and the killers who were never named. Like this video, so the algorithm shows it to someone who remembers 1982. And tell us in the comments, do you believe James Lewis did it? Or is the real Tylenol killer still out there? We read every reply.